On a frigid March morning in 2025, Aisha Carter strode into Horizon Airways headquarters at O'Hare, her 4 gold stripes gleaming proof of a career forged in the sky. She was ready to command her first flight as senior captain, a black woman defying the odds in a world where less than 1% of pilots look like her, but 7 words stopped her cold. "Captain Carter, we need you to wait outside." No explanation, just a smug smirk from a veteran pilot and a locked briefing room door. What they didn't know? Those words lit a fuse. Minutes later, Aisha would unravel a conspiracy that could crash an airline and maybe an industry. Hey, if you're hooked on this tale of grit and justice, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's dive into Aisha's fight together. On March 6, 2025, Aisha Carter walked into Horizon Airways headquarters at O'Hare International Airport, her heart pounding with quiet pride. At 37, she'd logged over 1,500 flight hours, piloting planes across every continent but Antarctica. Today marked her first day as senior captain at one of America's oldest airlines, a milestone for a black woman in an industry where less than 1% of commercial pilots shared her identity. Her uniform was crisp, the 4 gold stripes on her sleeves a testament to years of grit and skill. She pulled her pilot's case behind her, heading straight for the crew briefing room. Flight HA-27 to San Francisco was set to depart in a few hours, and she'd memorized every detail. Approach procedures, weather patterns, the works. This was her moment. But it didn't last long. Aisha stepped into the briefing room at 5:17 a.m., nodding to her co-pilot Ethan Tran, a sharp young Asian American with 5 years of experience. Before she could even set her flight docs on the table, Charles Donovan, Horizon's Executive Operations Director, strode in. His face was a mask of authority, his voice clipped. "Captain Carter, we need you to wait outside." 7 words, delivered without explanation or apology. The room went silent. Aisha felt every pair of eyes on her. 6 flight attendants, Ethan, and a few other pilots waiting for their assignments. Heat crept up her neck, but she kept her composure. "May I ask why?" she said, her tone steady despite the sting. Charles didn't flinch. "It's a procedural matter. Step outside." Ethan shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "She's scheduled for this flight," he said, his voice firm but cautious. "Weeks ago." Before Charles could respond, Victor Grayson, a grizzled captain in his 60s with thinning gray hair and the same 4 stripes, let out a low chuckle. "Guess she's not used to how we do things around here," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His smirk was a blade, cutting through the tension with deliberate cruelty. Aisha met his gaze, her pulse racing, but she didn't bite. "Not yet." Charles waved Ethan off. "Captain Grayson will take HA-27 Carter. You're reassigned to shadow him on the Seattle run later. Short hop, get you acclimated." Aisha's mind raced. She'd flown into San Francisco 73 times, handled turbulence over the Rockies, landed in storms that grounded lesser pilots. This wasn't about experience, it was something else. "With respect," she started, "my qualifications were reviewed extensively during hiring. I'm ready for this." Charles's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a discussion. Out." Victor leaned back, arms crossed, his amusement plain. Ethan looked like he wanted to say more, but he stayed quiet, his loyalty wavering under the weight of authority. Aisha gathered her papers, her movements deliberate, and walked out. The hallway felt colder than it should have, but she didn't lean against the wall or slump. She stood tall, replaying the moment in her head. This wasn't random. The sidelong glances in the crew lounge earlier, the pause in conversations when she'd grabbed coffee. It all clicked. She'd faced discrimination before, passengers demanding a real pilot, colleagues muttering about affirmative action, but this was calculated, a public flex of power to put her in her place on day one. Horizon wasn't just testing her, they were trying to break her. 10 minutes later, Ethan slipped out to find her. "That was bullshit," he said, keeping his voice low. "They're saying it's standard for new captains, but I've been here 3 years. No one's ever been pulled like that on their first flight." Aisha nodded, her jaw tight. "What else did they say?" Ethan hesitated, glancing down the hall. "Victor pushed for it, said you needed more time to fit in." Charles backed him up. He paused, then added, "They want you on Flight 422 to Seattle." Victor's commanding, "I'm sorry, Captain." The name hit her like a punch. Victor Grayson wasn't just any captain, he was Horizon's old guard, a man rumored to despise the airline's diversity push. She'd never met him before today, but his reputation preceded him, a gatekeeper who'd rather crash a career than share the cockpit with someone like her. "I see," she said quietly. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "If you want to file something, I'll back you. This isn't right. I should wait it." A complaint on day one would mark her as trouble, no matter how justified. She'd spent 20 years navigating these waters, military transport in Afghanistan, commercial gigs after, knowing when to push and when to wait. "I'll handle Seattle first," she said. "But thanks, Ethan, not everyone would have said that." As he walked away, her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, Nia. "First day as captain, knock 'em dead, sis, so proud." Aisha stared at it, emotions warring inside her. Pride in her climb, fury at the slapdown, resolve to not let this define her. She typed back, "All good so far, talk tonight," and pocketed the phone. Seattle with Victor would be a gauntlet, she knew that. But Aisha Carter didn't bend, not after coming this far. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a mantra from childhood. You've got to be twice as good to get half as far. She'd lived it every day. Top of her Air Force Academy class, 3 tours overseas, countless hours proving her worth. Horizon thought they could clip her wings with 7 words and a locked door. They were wrong. This wasn't the end. It was the spark. Aisha Carter strapped into the jump seat of the Boeing 737 bound for Seattle, her first assignment after being sidelined from San Francisco. It was a short hop, barely 2 hours, but she knew it wasn't about the flight. It was about Victor Grayson. The senior captain sat in the left seat, his posture rigid, his gray hair catching the cockpit's dim light. He barely acknowledged her presence, grunting once as she settled in behind him and First Officer Peter Lawson, a nervous-looking guy who avoided eye contact. Aisha kept her focus sharp, observing every move. She'd dealt with men like Victor before, old-school types who saw her as an intruder, but this felt personal. Halfway through pre-flight checks, Victor entered the approach control frequency. Aisha caught it instantly, 124.75 instead of Seattle's current 128.35, a rookie mistake, or a test. She waited a beat, giving him a chance to correct it. He didn't. Peter fidgeted but said nothing. "Captain," Aisha said, her voice calm, "I believe Seattle approaches 128.35 today." Victor's shoulders tensed, his fingers pausing over the radio. He checked the chart, then adjusted it without a word. Silence hung heavy until he finally turned his head just enough to glare at her. "Don't think one catch makes you Horizon material," he snapped. "This airline has standards you wouldn't understand." The threat was clear. She wasn't welcome, and he'd make sure she knew it. The flight itself was uneventful, but Victor's hostility simmered. He narrated every action in a condescending drawl as if she'd never flown before, pointing out altitude adjustments, explaining basic protocols she'd mastered a decade ago. Aisha bit her tongue, filing away his jabs. When they landed, he muttered, "Stick to shadowing, Carter. Some of us belong up front." She forced a nod and stepped off the plane, her stomach knotting with anger. This wasn't just hazing, it was a deliberate push to make her quit. Back at O'Hare that afternoon, Ethan Tran caught her outside the crew lounge. His face was tight, his voice hushed. "Watch yourself with Victor," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "They've done this before, pushed out a new captain a couple years back because he questioned too much. Charles and Victor hate change, especially from someone like..." He trailed off, but Aisha got it. Someone like her. "They're testing me," she said flatly. Ethan nodded. "More than that. They want you gone." She thanked him, but the warning stuck with her. Horizon wasn't just unwelcoming, it was a machine built to protect its own. The next day, Aisha was assigned a flight to Denver. Before boarding, she reviewed the maintenance logs, a habit drilled into her from military days. Something jumped out. The intake valve inspection dates didn't line up with the service records. One entry showed a check 2 weeks ago, but the last major overhaul was 6 months prior. She flagged it and tracked down Jamal Brooks, a middle-aged black technician with 20 years at Horizon. He was tightening a panel on the 737 when she approached. "Jamal, these logs, something's off," she said, keeping her tone casual. He froze, then met her eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "They've been rushing us. Sign off quick, keep the planes flying. Half these birds should be grounded for proper checks, but management doesn't care." Aisha's pulse quickened. That's not legal. Jamal grimaced. They've got lawyers who twist it into a gray area. Been like this since the new route started. More flights, less downtime. We're cutting corners. Before she could press him, a supervisor walked by and Jamal clammed up. Be careful who you ask, he muttered, then turned back to his work. Aisha walked away, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her anymore. Safety was on the line. That evening, Charles Donovan summoned her to his office. He didn't offer a seat. You're stirring things up, Carter, he said, his voice low and hard. Questioning logs, slowing down my cruise. Keep it up and you'll be out of a job. Aisha stood straighter. I found discrepancies. FAA regs require accurate records. Charles's face darkened. Our teams handle it. You don't trust them. Maybe Horizon's not for you. It was a warning wrapped in a threat. She nodded, said nothing, and left, but the message was clear. Toe the line or get crushed. The next morning the rumors started. Victor had been talking loudly in the lounge, claiming Aisha was a diversity hire, unqualified and coasting on politics. By midday she overheard 2 flight attendants whispering it in the galley. Then came the email. She opened it on her phone during a break. The sky's not for people like you. Go back where you came from. No sender, just venom. Aisha's hands shook as she deleted it, but the words burned into her. She'd faced hate before, passengers refusing to board, snide comments in training, but this was a gut punch, anonymous and vicious. Ethan caught up with her later, his expression guilty. I heard about the rumors, he said. Victor's an asshole, but he hesitated. Look, I've got a kid on the way. I can't stick my neck out. I'm sorry. Aisha stared at him, the sting of betrayal sharp. I get it, she said, her voice flat. He walked away and she stood alone in the terminal, the weight of isolation settling in. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Nia. How's day 2, Captain? Aisha didn't reply. She couldn't tell her sister she was fighting a war she might not win. That night, alone in her Chicago apartment, Aisha replayed it all. Victor's test, Jamal's confession, Charles's threat, the email, Ethan's retreat. Horizon wasn't just prejudiced, it was rotten. She thought of her father, a mechanic who'd died 5 years back, his words a lifeline. You've got to be twice as good to get half as far. She'd graduated top of her class, flown combat zones, earned every stripe, but here it wasn't enough. They didn't just want her out. They were hiding something bigger. Aisha opened her laptop, pulled up Horizon's public records, and started digging. She wasn't done yet. Aisha Carter knew she couldn't fight Horizon Airways alone, not with the walls closing in. 2 days after the Denver flight, she found an ally in Sarah Nguyen, a seasoned flight attendant with a no-nonsense edge. They met in a quiet corner of the crew lounge, away from prying eyes. Sarah slid her phone across the table, showing a photo time-stamped a month ago. A cracked cabin pressure valve on Flight 336 to Toronto. They cleared it anyway, Sarah said, her voice low. Visual inspection failed, but delaying it would have triggered crew rest rules and canceled 3 more flights. I took this because I couldn't sleep knowing it. Aisha studied the image, her gut tightening. This wasn't a minor oversight. It was a gamble with lives. Why tell me now? She asked. Sarah's eyes hardened. Because you're the first captain I've seen who might actually do something. That same afternoon, Aisha tracked down Jamal Brooks in the maintenance hangar. He was hunched over an engine cowling, his hands steady but his face tense. She didn't waste time. Jamal, I need more than hints. What's really going on? He hesitated, then pulled a USB drive from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. Flight logs, fake maintenance records, internal emails. Proof they're pushing us to sign off on junk, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. At least 30% of the fleet's got issues that should ground them. Aisha's breath caught. Why risk giving me this? Jamal's jaw tightened. I've got 3 kids, Captain. I can't go public. But I can't keep pretending this is okay either. She nodded, slipping the drive into her jacket. I'll keep you out of it, she promised. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Aisha plugged the USB into her laptop. The files painted a grim picture, skipped inspections, downgraded structural flaws, memos from execs demanding faster turnarounds. One email from Charles Donovan to the maintenance chief stood out. Efficiency is priority. Delays cost us more than fixes. She cross-checked dates and found a lead. Darren Miles, a technician who'd fallen from a scaffold a year ago after flagging engine mount issues on a 787 Horizon, called it negligence, denied his medical claims, and left him crippled. Aisha's hands clenched. This wasn't an accident. It was a warning to anyone who spoke up. The next morning, Charles upped the ante. He called her into his office, his tone icy. "You're on notice, Carter. Your performance is under review." He handed her a revised schedule. Red-eye flights, short layovers, the worst routes Horizon had. Prove you can handle it, or you're done. Aisha scanned the list. Chicago to Vegas at 2 a.m., back-to-back hauls with minimal rest. It was punitive, designed to exhaust her into submission. Before she could respond, her phone pinged with another anonymous email. "Get out before it's too late." No signature, just menace. She deleted it, but the threat lingered. Charles smirked, as if he knew. "Anything else?" he asked. "No, sir," she said, her voice flat, and walked out. The pressure didn't stop there. Horizon started shadowing her every move. A security guard trailed her in the terminal, lingering too long near the crew lounge. Her pre-flight checks were audited twice by supervisors who nitpicked her paperwork but found nothing. At home, she video-called Nia, her older sister, and a lawyer with a razor-sharp mind. "They're burying me," Aisha said, showing the schedule. Nia's face darkened. "This is retaliation, plain and simple. You've got grounds to sue, but be careful. They'll do anything to shut you up." Aisha nodded, exhaustion warring with resolve. "I found something bigger. Maintenance fraud, maybe worse. Darren Miles? He didn't just fall." Nia leaned closer. "You sure about this? If you push, your career's toast. Aviation doesn't forgive whistleblowers." Aisha's eyes narrowed. "I didn't sign up to fly coffins." The decision crystallized that night. She couldn't back down, not with lives at stake. She spent hours poring over Jamal's files, cross-referring to everyone's photo with FAA regs. The cracked valve alone violated 3 safety codes. Darren's accident tied it together. Horizon wasn't just cutting corners, they were silencing dissent with force. She emailed Sarah, "Send me everything you've got, secure line." By morning, her inbox had a dozen images and notes from Sarah. More defects, more cover-ups. Aisha burned it all to a second USB, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. Charles's next move came fast. She was pulled from a flight to Miami mid-briefing, replaced by a junior captain with half her hours. Victor was there, smirking as she left the room. "Told you she wouldn't last," he said to the crew, loud enough for her to hear. Humiliation burned, but Aisha kept walking. She called Nia again. "I'm going all in," she said. "Can you get me an FAA contact?" Nia didn't hesitate. "Done." "But Aisha, they might not just fire you, they could ruin you." Aisha stared at the USB on her desk. "Let them try." She knew the cost. 20 years of climbing, Air Force Academy, combat tours, commercial cockpits, could end in a black mark no airline would touch. But her father's words echoed louder than ever. Twice as good to get half as far. She'd been proving herself since day one. Now it wasn't about her, it was about the passengers trusting her wings, the crews risking their necks. Horizon wanted her broken. Instead, they'd forged her resolve. She'd fight, even if it meant burning it all down. Aisha Carter knew the summons was coming, but when it hit, it still felt like a punch. At 2 p.m. on a gray Wednesday, a week after she'd started gathering evidence, her phone buzzed with a curt message from HR, executive conference room, now. She grabbed her bag, the weight of 2 USB drives and a printed folder steadying her nerves. She'd spent the night with Nia, her sister, finalizing everything. FAA report submitted at 9 a.m., a duplicate package sent to the Chicago Tribune at noon. No turning back. She walked into the room at Horizon Airways headquarters, head high, and faced the firing squad, Charles Donovan, Victor Grayson, and 2 lawyers in crisp suits. The air crackled with hostility. Charles didn't waste time. He stood behind the polished table, his face red, and slammed his palm down hard enough to rattle the water glasses. "You're done, Carter," he barked. "Resign now or we'll destroy you. Your record, your license, everything. No one will touch you after we're through." His voice was a hammer, meant to shatter her. Victor sat to his right, arms crossed, a smug grin tugging at his lips. The lawyers, one lean and bald, the other heavy-set with a perpetual frown, flanked them, legal pads at the ready. Aisha didn't flinch. She set her bag down, pulled out the thick folder, and placed it on the table with a soft thud that silenced the room. "Here's the deal," she said, her voice steady as steel. "At 9 a.m. today, my attorney delivered a report to the FAA detailing Horizon's safety violations, falsified maintenance logs, planes flying with known defects, and documented pressure on employees to ignore it all. At noon, the Chicago Tribune got the same package plus proof of retaliation against whistleblowers. If anything happens to me or anyone who helped me, every major news outlet and aviation authority worldwide gets a copy. It's already in secure storage, timed for release." She paused, letting it sink in. "So no, I won't be resigning." The room erupted. Victor shot to his feet, his chair scraping back. "This is blackmail," he roared, his face twisting with rage. He lunged across the table, reaching for the folder, his fingers inches from it. Aisha didn't move, but the lean lawyer grabbed Victor's arm, yanking him back. "Sit down," the lawyer hissed, his voice sharp. Victor shook him off, breathing hard, his pale blue eyes locked on Aisha like he could burn her down with a look. Charles, meanwhile, went pale, his bravado crumbling. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. The heavy-set lawyer scribbled furiously, avoiding her gaze. Aisha crossed her arms. "Check your email. The FAA's already calling." She'd timed it perfectly. Naya's contact had confirmed receipt an hour ago. Charles fumbled with his phone, his hands trembling as he scrolled. Victor snarled, "You've got no proof. This is a stunt." Aisha raised an eyebrow. "Tell that to the cracked pressure valve on Flight 336, or the 787 engine mounts Darren Miles died trying to fix. It's all here." She tapped the folder. "Logs, photos, emails from you, Charles, telling maintenance to prioritize efficiency. Want me to quote it?" Charles froze, his phone slipping onto the table. The lean lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in his ear, but Charles waved him off, his eyes darting between Aisha and the folder. "What do you want?" he finally croaked, his voice hoarse with panic. Victor cut in. "Don't negotiate with her. She's—" The heavy-set lawyer interrupted. "Shut up, Victor. Let him handle it." Aisha stepped forward, her tone unwavering. "3 things, non-negotiable. Ground every plane with maintenance issues immediately. Order an independent safety audit, guarantee no retaliation against anyone who helped me. You've got 1 hour." Victor exploded again. "That'll bankrupt us," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're killing this airline." Aisha met his glare. "As opposed to what? The FAA pulling your certificate? Families suing when a plane drops because you flew it broken?" Her words landed like blows, and Victor's face went slack, his anger faltering. Charles rubbed his temples, sweat beading on his forehead. "We need time," he muttered. Aisha shook her head. 1 hour, then I call my contacts and tell them to go public. Full blast." She picked up her bag, leaving the folder as a grenade on the table. The lawyers huddled with Charles, their whispers frantic. Victor paced, muttering curses, his fists clenched. "She's bluffing," he said again, but it sounded hollow. Aisha turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "One more thing," she said, looking back at Charles. "You threatened I'd never fly again. I'd rather not fly than let people die because of you." Her voice was calm, final, a blade of truth cutting through their bluster. Charles stared, speechless. Victor spat, "You'll regret this, Carter." She didn't reply, just walked out, her heart pounding but her resolve ironclad. In the hallway she checked her watch, 2:15 p.m., 55 minutes left. Her phone buzzed. "Nia, FAA's in, Tribune's running it tomorrow unless they cave. You okay?" Aisha texted back, "Fine, it's done." She leaned against the wall, replaying the scene. Victor's lunge, Charles's panic. It was chaos, but she'd held the line. She'd faced worse in Afghanistan, staring down storms and enemy fire. This was different, though. This wasn't just her life, it was hundreds of passengers, crews, families. Horizon had pushed her to the edge, thinking she'd break. Instead, she'd turned their game against them. She knew the fallout would be brutal. If they fought back, her career might not survive the blacklist, but she thought of Sarah's photos, Jamal's kids, Darren's broken back. This wasn't about her anymore. Charles's hour was ticking. Aisha straightened, ready for whatever came next. They'd underestimated her, and that was their mistake. Charles Donovan's hour expired at 3:15 p.m., and Horizon Airways didn't blink. By 4 p.m., Aisha made the call. AFA swooped in the next morning, grounding 40% of Horizon's fleet after inspectors found cracked valves, frayed wiring, and logs that didn't match reality. The Chicago Tribune's expose hit the stands at dawn, headlined "Gambled with Lives." Horizon's stock plummeted 60% in hours, passengers stranded, flights canceled nationwide. By week's end, the FAA revoked their operating certificate, citing systemic safety failures. Bankruptcy followed fast. Horizon was done, a titan felled by its own rot. Charles and Victor were suspended pending investigation, but they didn't go quietly. They fed the rumor mill, painting Aisha as a vengeful saboteur who'd torched a legacy out of spite. It didn't stick. Sarah Gwynn and Jamal Brooks stepped into the light. Sarah went on record with her photos, telling CNN, "Captain Carter saved us from a disaster." Jamal, risking his job, handed over duplicate files to investigators, his voice steady. "I couldn't live with the lie anymore." Their courage sparked a wave. Dozens of ex-employees came forward, spilling stories of rigged inspections and silenced warnings. The industry reeled, airlines scrambling to audit themselves before the feds did it for them. Atlantic Airways swooped in, buying Horizon's carcass cheap, cherry-picking assets and staff. They offered Aisha a senior captain slot within days, touting her as proof of their new era. She didn't respond. The offers piled up fast. Safety organizations begged her to consult, promising six-figure fees to reform their protocols. A publisher pitched a book deal, The Pilot Who Broke the Sky. Even the FAA dangled a seat on a new oversight committee. Aisha sat on her Chicago couch, staring at the emails. Her Nia, sprawled across from her after a late-night strategy session, pushed. "Take something, sis. You want. You're a hero." Aisha shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I don't want to fix their mess, Nia. I'm done with their system. I'm building my own." Nia blinked. "What's that mean?" Aisha leaned forward, eyes bright. "A flight school. For kids like me who never see themselves in the cockpit. Minorities, women, anyone the old guard shuts out. That's my fight now." She made it real in weeks. With her savings and a small loan, Aisha leased a hangar outside Chicago, hired instructors, some ex-Horizon, some fresh faces, and opened Carter Wings Academy. The first class had 10 students. Black, Latino, Asian, all hungry to fly. She taught the first lesson herself, standing in front of a beat-up Cessna, saying the sky doesn't care who you are, only what you do. Word spread. Applications tripled by month 2. Atlantic called again, upping their offer. She declined politely. The safety gigs, the book, she let them lapse. This was her horizon, not theirs. 3 months later, an email pinged her inbox. Subject, from Victor Grayson. She almost trashed it, but curiosity won. "Captain Carter," it read. "I've had time to think, serving community hours after the plea deal. I was wrong. About you, about a lot. You forced me to see it. I'm sorry. No excuses. Just that." Aisha stared at the screen, her finger hovering over delete. She felt nothing. No triumph, no bitterness, just done. She hit delete, walked to her balcony, and watched a jet climb into the night sky, its lights fading among the stars. "The sky doesn't need apologies," she murmured. "It needs truth." She turned away, leaving the industry she'd cracked open. Aviation was changing, blind hiring at some carriers. Whistleblower protections beefed up, diversity no longer a buzzword but a shift. Aisha had lit the fuse, but she didn't stay to watch it burn. Carter Wings was her legacy now, a place where the next generation wouldn't wait outside anyone's door. Nia texted, "Dinner tomorrow? Big news." Aisha replied, "Your place. I'll bring wine." She grabbed her jacket and stepped out. The city hummed below her. The fight with Horizon was history. Her story wasn't. She'd rewritten the rules, then walked away. Free, unbound, her wings her own.